Today I'm out and about doing two of my favourite things, that's walking and filmmaking, and I've actually come to a stretch of water near my house called Ruislip Lido, and funnily enough I've lived here for about 8 years but I've never actually been here before. Anyway, I'm really enjoying myself and I think I'm capturing some really nice images in this low winter light that we're now enjoying. But today isn't about this stretch of water specifically, it's more about me and my GH5, and in particular the images that I've been trying to produce with it for the last 9 months. I've been trying to get what we call cinematic images, which is what I think I want, what you want, and what everybody on YouTube seems to want these days. So today I want to tell you about the 6 lenses that I've been using with my GH5 and why. Let's start out by talking about the kit lens that I got with my GH5. It's the Panasonic 12-60mm f3.5. Now in my last video I was telling you what a great lens I thought this was for travel and vlogging, but I do have some reservations. For a start, it only stops down to f3.5, so I only ever really use this lens outdoors. I always use an ND filter so that I can stay at f3.5. I also have sharpness and contrast turned right down in my camera, and I try never to shoot above 100 ISO. Even then I have to be careful. For example, I noticed in my last video that sometimes my images were still looking a bit more like video than film. And when I looked into this I realised I was only really getting the best out of this lens under certain circumstances. For example, cloudy days when the whole sky acts like a giant softbox, or at the magical golden hour when everything seems to look fantastic. This meant that my highlights were never too blown out and the dark areas weren't so dark that I couldn't bring back some definition in post. Next we have the Panasonic 14-140mm f3.5. Again, this isn't the fastest lens, so all the same rules apply as with the 12-60mm, but that's okay again as I only use this lens outdoors for capturing images of people or landscapes at a distance. This lens of course has a massively useful focal length, and a lot of documentary makers are very keen on this lens as it gives them so many options. 14-140, don't forget, is the equivalent of 28-280mm on a full frame camera. If you have the lens fully extended, it only stops down to f5.6. Again, that doesn't really matter though, because realistically you are only going to be using this lens outdoors. Like the 12-60mm, this lens also has built-in stabilization, meaning that when you use it in combination with the GH5 body, you're actually getting dual image stabilization. And that means you're far less likely to be lugging around a heavy tripod to get shots like this. One thing I don't like about this lens, and this goes for Panasonic lenses in general with the GH5, is that when you're in manual mode it can be very difficult to focus because of the focus by wire system. And this means that the lens communicates its focus electronically, and sometimes I do find there's a bit of a lag with the camera body. Now let's have a look at the Panasonic 25mm f1.7. Everybody's always talking about how sharp images should be, and how sharp in particular certain lenses should be, but when you put that in combination with modern camera sensors, you can often get an image that is so sharp it looks more like video than film. In fact, many professional filmmakers are now choosing to go with cheap vintage manual lenses of the past, as they seem to have a more cinematic and filmic quality to them. Funnily enough, that's why I love the 25mm, because even though it is a relatively new lens with a very wide aperture, it's also slightly soft, and I think it does have a vintage feel to it. 25mm is the equivalent of 50mm on a full frame camera, and that's pretty much how the human eye sees. So when I'm out and about, I use it for establishing shots like these. So that's the native lenses out of the way. Now let's talk about the non-native lenses that I've been using. First up we have the Tokina 11-16mm f2.8. This is left over from my old Canon days, and I'm really glad to say that I kept hold of this lens because I was having a real problem finding a native wide-angle lens of such good quality. I use it mostly for outdoor close-ups like this, or when I need some funky indoor angles on products like this, when I mostly use it at 16mm because I don't want the image to distort too much. Like all of my non-native lenses, I use this in conjunction with a Viltrox speed booster. Now there are some well-documented problems, in particular focusing to infinity with the Viltrox speed booster, but as far as I'm concerned that's not a problem because I only really use this lens for close work. In the future I might try a Comlight speed booster, and maybe one day if I can remortgage my house I might even be able to afford a Metabone speed booster, but right now I'd rather spend that type of money on a new computer. But whichever speed booster you eventually end up using, don't forget it means that you can go from f2.8 to a staggeringly wide f2, fantastic for low light situations. And speaking of low light, that brings us nicely to the Canon 50mm f1.8, also known as the Nifty 50 or Plastic Fantastic. I've actually owned this lens for 4 years now since I started filmmaking, and it's never really been out of my camera bag. It's fantastic for interviews where I've often used it wide open at f1.8, and it's also great for product photography indoors because it also has a macro capability, meaning you can get close to any subject and in low light. In combination with the Viltrox speed booster, it goes down to f1.3, although I do tend to find it sharpest at between f1.8 and f2.8. Even though the Panasonic 25mm f1.7 covers a lot of the same ground, I've got a soft spot for this lens, not only because of its quality, but also the fact that it's also very easy to focus in manual mode. And I used it for all of these tabletop shots of the various lenses I'm talking about today. And no matter what camera body you shoot with, I think you should definitely own this lens at least once, just to see what all the fuss is about. Finally, I think I've saved the best till last. It's not an expensive lens, it's not a heavy lens, it's not even a Canon full-frame lens, but it is a lens that I think slips under a lot of people's radar. It's the Tamron 17-50mm f2.8. Again, I almost sold this lens when I bought my GH5, and boy am I glad I didn't. I bought this crop sensor lens second-hand on eBay a couple of years ago for £100 or so. 17-50mm is such a useful and versatile range when you're shooting in a run and gun or documentary style. It has a constant aperture of f2.8 throughout the focal range, letting light pour onto my micro four thirds sensor for pin-sharp images indoors and outdoors. And once more, in combination with the speed booster, it stops down to f2. I own the older version of this lens without image stabilization, but the GH5 body makes up for that. And now I'm getting serious about my filmmaking and the images I'm capturing. I pretty much shoot in manual mode all the time. Used in combination with the Viltrox and the GH5's focus peaking, there doesn't appear to be any lag between the lens and the body, and the focus ring has a great feel to it without too much play. The whole setup feels so comfortable and balanced in my hands that I could happily shoot with it all day. So it won't come as any surprise to you that if I had to choose just one lens out of the lenses I've been talking about today that matches my current shooting style, then the Tamron would definitely be it. So in conclusion, the GH5 is a fantastic camera and you can get some superb images out of it. But in order to do that, you're really going to have to be using fast lenses. Now, they don't always have to cost you a fortune. You can buy them secondhand like me, or find lots of different ways. Maybe trade in some of your old gear and you'll be able to get maybe 1 or 2 fast lenses. And with that, you'll be able to cover pretty much any situation that comes up, particularly if you're shooting in a sort of documentary or run and gun style. That's it for this week, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed finding out a bit more about what the GH5 can do and the fact that it is still a great camera in 2019 going into 2020. I'll see you again in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.